Back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 29th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election, according to FiveThirtyEight, and their recent election forecast that just came out less than a week ago. This election forecast, which has been very interesting to track, especially as it releases past data since the announcement of Joe Biden departing from the presidential race. On the day he left the presidential race, Joe Biden had less than a 50% chance at winning the presidential election against former President Donald Trump. Today, the odds have completely flipped, with Vice President Kamala Harris at a 58% chance at victory and former President Trump at a 42% chance. Right now, it looks like there seems to be no tie or any reality in which we end up with a 269-269 electoral college map. It seemed far more plausible with a Joe Biden-Donald Trump matchup, but today, with Vice President Harris in the advantage, a big question rings through our heads as to where FiveThirtyEight believes her pathway to victory lies. Now, the 2024 race, as I've been saying for a while, has really always been quite competitive for Democrats and Republicans. But things got really bad for Democrats after that first presidential debate when Donald Trump led Joe Biden by roughly 3 points nationwide. Donald Trump had expanded his lead a lot further than where it was before at different periods of time right up to the debate. Joe Biden actually started to gain momentum. Donald Trump had maintained an advantage over Joe Biden throughout the duration of the campaign period. According to CNN, through the debate, not a single day in 2024 did Joe Biden lead Donald Trump, a complete flip where Joe Biden led Donald Trump in 100% of the days between Joe Biden announced his candidacy and the November election. 2024, it was entirely different. And so that was up until that first presidential debate when Joe Biden, right beforehand, a week before that debate, ended up in the advantage. And around this point, the Republican Party was getting quite worried because it meant that the lead that Donald Trump had built up was starting to come down to a point where Joe Biden, on average, was taking the advantage. But then, of course, that first debate happened. It was a complete catastrophe for national Democrats, namely President Biden. And so the numbers started to get worse and worse and worse until we ended up with Joe Biden dropping out of the race, where he was down 3.2% nationally. Then came in Vice President Kamala Harris, who now today leads by 3 points nationally. That is a 6-point swing in just around a month's time. And so on the FiveThirtyEight forecast, the results here ends up with Kamala Harris in the advantage, but not a substantial shift. And so that's why I'm also quite interested in exploring where we see the margins really narrowing down. I'll talk to you a bit about what I'm using for characterization so it makes a little bit more sense. But generally speaking, this forecast has actually seen quite a significant change in the way that it has been adapted, in the way that it has been utilized, and they talk about that on the FiveThirtyEight website. Unfortunately, we're not going to spend too much time talking about that, but the headline there is more that they've shifted away from fundamentals, things around unemployment and the economy and incumbency advantage, now more towards a polling and enthusiasm-based model, which has been a general indicator of a general sense of, a set of qualities that has been a factor in practically the majority of the other pollsters and the majority of the other firms that do produce models, which is why Donald Trump led on models like The Economist, where they had Donald Trump at a 2/3 chance of victory, why Donald Trump led on Nate Silver, which had a 2/3 chance of victory. Do I think FiveThirtyEight was, in a way, onto something beforehand? Possibly, right? I mean, they have had a very, very strong track record when it comes down to understanding the way at which incumbency impacts an election, but still, they've had times in 2022 where they've overestimated Republicans. In 2020, they also underestimated Republicans. And so it's really just a flip side. I will say the 2024 election, to me, hopefully will be one that is led with more accuracy, more of a general understanding. And now that we have two non-incumbents, it's a race that can be more generally understood by, again, enthusiasm factors, rally numbers, overall polling data, fundraising data, so many different points. I think that could be really exciting and really helpful in understanding this race. So you heard a lot of yap. You heard a lot of talking about the FiveThirtyEight model and the polls. Let's go ahead and just dive into this electoral forecast. And so a lot of what is driving it, I think, right now in favor of Kamala Harris in terms of where she's doing the best is the Rust Belt region of the United States. Now, looking early on, when she was up against Donald Trump, she actually was not in a position where she was on track for victory, and that was a really poor point for Democrats. It isn't necessarily to say that I believe those numbers to be true, and Kamala Harris's immediate announcement, she definitely needed time to rebrand herself, become more popular nationwide, but I will say, too, I think her chances probably would have been a little bit higher than what they had put her in, around 47%, maybe around 50. I think there was immediately a surge of excitement and enthusiasm around her candidacy, but still today, much, much better position. And that's what's most important about this, is that tracking this data over the past month, you can see that Donald Trump's odds at victory have started to decline. That is on a pretty consistent pathway to a point where by election day might be less than a third. And that's really bad news for Donald Trump, because he was the favorite for a majority of the time that we have seen this forecast released against Biden, and honestly speaking, was in the majority of voters, not majority, but rather plurality of voters nationwide throughout the duration of the campaign period. And so to see this collapse in real time really goes to show that an effective and strong Democratic campaign and candidacy can lead to a point where you're in a position where you are now winning on the national forecast, when in reality, you might not have been a month and a half ago. And so when we take a look at this map here, I'm going to be mapping it on yapms.com, yet another political map simulator. If you've been wondering about anything that I use in my videos, you can check the description box down below. By the way, I saw a few of you guys ask me what map I use here. But here we have our 538 total number of electoral votes, an electoral college map that will be filled in as we go through these states. Now, one thing that has been really consistent throughout this time frame is that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going to win their respective safe states, really no matter what. Meaning states like Washington and Oregon and California are never, ever, ever going to the Republican Party, no matter how much happens on the national scale in this election. I mean, Kamala Harris tomorrow could be in a position where she's losing the battleground states, but in no circumstance does she lose the safe states, and the model acknowledges that. States like Idaho and Utah are also grouped into there. And so any state that really has a 95+% chance of victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and for Donald Trump, I would argue is even safe. I could see a reality in which it is 90% or higher, but for right now, let's go ahead and just stick with 95 to see what electoral map we end up with. So characterizing all of the states that are necessary, if we look at them, Republicans were hoping New Jersey might be more competitive. Donald Trump started opening up field offices in the state, also started doing rallies in the state. Doesn't really matter to me because I don't think it's going to be that way. Right now, Virginia is pretty solid for Democrats. Minnesota as well makes a lot of sense, but not safe just yet. Democrats are safe, not yet, in Colorado, New Mexico. I would say by margin, probably not, but in terms of my expectation, I'd say so. But no, here we are. Roughly 180 electoral votes right now. I think maybe Maine's first would be in there, so 181 for the Democratic Party. Let's move over to Republicans, who have a pretty considerable number of safe states as well. So here we have Missouri and Indiana. Iowa's not in there. Montana is. Alaska is not. So that's quite interesting. When you take a look at this map here, you might be shocked to see that Alaska is not filling in the map when states like South Carolina and Missouri and Indiana, which have been under 15 points in years past, but right now I'd say, Republicans are not exactly in a position where they're going to win Alaska by 15 points plus. Donald Trump has just a 90% chance of victory there. Actually, quite surprising, South Carolina is also not a safe red state. So to save us time, I want to go ahead and continue to characterize all the states that are likely. These are states that are really not going to move out of the Republican Party or Democratic Party. They just aren't going to be decided by massive, massive margins in the way that you might have seen for some of these other states. And the percent chance of victory, again, can help give general indicators of where Kamala Harris has the most strength. Regional advantage in the Deep South, not regional rather, candidate advantage in the Sun Belt region, regional advantage in the Southwestern region of the United States. Generally speaking, Kamala Harris does provide a lot to the Democratic ticket in those, in the entire Sun Belt. Equally for Donald Trump, he also provides a level of electability and candidacy in the Rust Belt, in Iowa and Ohio, that Republicans typically and historically have not been able to tap into quite well. George W. Bush was really the last Republican who was able to do there, and that was largely because Democrats did not run a strong candidate when it came down to the presidential level in those states, and even then, Democrats still came out ahead. But overall, the Rust Belt region is where Donald Trump really went to show that he had the strength to do it. Republicans down ballot do not do well in those states, and so I'd be quite surprised for us to come to this assumption that he's not necessarily the best for the Rust Belt. Well, he is not the best, but good for the Rust Belt because he has done certainly a tremendous benefit for the Republican Party since 2016, winning those states at the same time. It doesn't mean that these are states that are necessarily taking him back in for an electoral college victory. It just means he's doing better than Romney did and McCain did. Moving past that point, the likely states we're talking about are states like Iowa, states like Ohio, where you have a 75% chance or higher of going to the Republican Party. And so that, again, means states like South Carolina and Alaska that might not have been there before. Florida, surprisingly enough, is not on that likely characterization. I, again, disagree with that based on margin, but this is based on odds. And it also seems like based on some new data points in Florida that Democrats actually have a better shot at the state. But overall, I'd say, my personal belief here is that we should not acknowledge it necessarily as this battleground state that can be characterized with the Big Seven. However, it will be closer than the majority of states in the United States. In terms of likely Democratic states as well, this includes states like New Hampshire and Minnesota and Colorado and New Mexico and Virginia. So when we characterize that in, that's really where you start to see Democrats do quite well on the national level. I don't know why Nebraska at large was characterized as safe blue. That might have been a mistake here. But New Hampshire, Virginia, Minnesota, Colorado, New Mexico, going to be pretty solid for the Democratic Party. Nebraska's second, also there at 75%. So that one becomes a likely blue state. And so that leaves us here with remaining 163 electoral college votes. Actually not that surprising, right? In terms of states that Democrats are hopeful to do well in, it includes all 7 of these traditional battleground states and Texas and Florida. So it actually isn't too far out of the fray. I will say that in terms of the easier states to just move out of the way are states like Florida and Texas, which we know are going to be, to the Republican Party. And the numbers here show that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are the favorites in Florida. They're the favorites in Texas by quite a bit, but it's still closer than some other states. And I think this is a general trend line that we're seeing again in that Sunbelt region where Kamala Harris is providing a level of electoral power and presence that might not mean that she wins Florida or wins Texas, but she certainly narrows it up in a way the Democrats did in 2016 and in 2020. Florida has been moving in the wrong direction for Democrats, but maybe she can, patch some of that bleeding just a little bit. I still think she'll lose by more than Biden did in 2020. Equally, though, we have to acknowledge that right now Democrats are in a position where Florida is not going to be this 20-point electoral blowout like it was in 2022, and that's really good news for the Democratic Party, not only for the presidential ticket, but also down ballot. And that leads us down to 93 toss-up electoral votes, but here's the good news for Democrats. When you're taking a look at states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, they largely are characterized as 55% or higher in terms of the odds of victory for Vice President Harris. And even when you take a look at states that have not been favorable to even Biden or Harris really over the past month, compared to the Rust Belt states, states like Georgia and Arizona, where the numbers aren't moving in a positive direction, but aren't moving in a way that means it's going to be a slam dunk for Democrats like they're hoping for. Democrats clearly have a lot of work to do in these states, but the numbers are getting better than they were a month ago. When Kamala Harris was not the favorite to win this national forecast, Georgia was at a 60% chance for Trump. Today, it's tied. Arizona was at a 60% chance for Trump. Today, Harris is in the advantage. And so when we start to see these changes and these shifts here, it again speaks to a general trend line of where Kamala Harris has the most advantages for the Democratic Party and where she provides the most electoral benefit. North Carolina is still the favorite for Trump. Now Nevada moves over into what we would say as a lean Democratic state, 55% or higher. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania also join that group. So Michigan being 62, Wisconsin being 60, Pennsylvania being 55, that's enough to bring Kamala Harris over the finish line to 276 electoral votes. The good news for her, she's up in the advantage in the state of Arizona. Donald Trump is up in the advantage in the state of North Carolina. Georgia right now is a tie. And so we're going to leave it as a toss-up. 16 electoral votes out. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance at 235. Vice President Harris, Governor Tim Walz at 287. This is an electoral college victory for the Democratic Party, but it is not as big as it was in 2020. And so here we have it. What 538 believes the 2024 electoral map will look like. It's pretty strong, I would say, for Kamala Harris in comparison to where President Biden was, but it's not as strong as it was in 2020. And so Democrats are going to have to come into this election, again, fighting for every vote, fighting for every single state, because at this point to this election doesn't feel and is certainly not a slam dunk, right? It doesn't feel like one. It doesn't seem like one. And Democrats, I think, are recognizing that, which is why I do think there is still a level of electoral power that is really strong and sits with the modern day Democratic Party, because they are really jaded from the 2016 election where the polls and the indicators, everything said that Hillary Clinton would be the next president and Donald Trump served out a 4-year term. He might have lost in 2020, but they were sold on this idea of a landslide. Now, in my final 2020 election prediction, I did not have states like Texas or Iowa or Ohio as blue states. I knew in the end Donald Trump would win them. Donald Trump did invest a lot of money in the states, but arguably so did Democrats. Joe Biden spent over $300 million across those 3 states that I mentioned to lose Iowa by 8, to lose Ohio by 8, to lose Texas by 6. He did, however, flip Georgia for the first time since 92, flip Arizona for the first time since 96, flip back the blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But that election, I think, feels very differently than this one does, and so did 2016. And so I think Democrats are really leaving nothing to chance. You see today that Vice President Harris is down in Savannah, Georgia. She is the first candidate, Democrat or Republican, to campaign in that state in a general election season since the 1990s. Democrats are making a play for these core 7 battleground states, and what we are finding is that play so far is working. They're winning in 5 out of the 7, according to 538. They're tied in one of them and just narrowly down in North Carolina, which would make it the third closest state in the presidential election. Newsflash, exactly what it was like. Very similar to 2020. Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia were the only states that were narrower than North Carolina in the 2020 presidential. And so to see this state now come back as a very close race, sure, Donald Trump is ahead, but it's simply not enough. Kamala Harris right now, according to 538, takes over 270 electoral votes, which results in her being at 58% in terms of overall chance at winning the election and gives her over 270 electoral votes that are necessary to win the presidential election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.